And we are back with another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show. And I am very excited today to have Dan McKnight joining me, U.S. Army veteran, fought in the terror wars. And of course, he is the guy who runs Bring Our Troops Home, one of the most important organizations, MDAD, trying to curtail the U.S. empire, the endless wars we are fighting. Dan, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, sir?
Great, Kyle. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And you are right. We are doing everything we can to end these damn wars. But thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Dan, a lot I want to talk to you about today. So much happening. It seems that the Iran war is a war without a strategy. The Guards' role in the Iran war and General Caine's role in 9/11. This was pretty interesting. I think you have some big thoughts on that. So, want to start off here with this post from Donald Trump on Truth Social. It's the length of wars, and he says everybody needs to study this. The Afghan war, the Vietnam war, the Iraq war, they went on for hundreds and hundreds of weeks. And his excursion, as he would like to call it, in Iran has only been 6 weeks long. So, Dan, is this to say we shouldn't be concerned about what's happening in Iran because so far it's been a short war?
Boy, why is it always the ones with the biggest egos are most worried about the length and size of things? It's a little bit frustrating, but his graph is a little bit misleading because what he didn't show is that all those wars also ended in losses. And something we should note that none of them were declared by Congress, none of them were properly authorized. And President Trump at this point doesn't have multiple strategies; he has infinite strategies and tactics. I think he's declared victory, I don't know, a dozen or more times. And I'm old enough to remember when another president landed on an aircraft carrier in a flight suit and said mission accomplished, only to have 8 more years of war or 10 more years of war in Iraq. So I think he's a little bit misguided on this. It's not the length of the war; it's how we get into it. It's what is America's involvement there? Why are we there? Who pushed us into it, and what was the intelligence that took us there?
Absolutely. And, I want to get into that, kind of what we're trying to do in Iran. This is Senator Reid discussing Trump's war.
One of the things that's so confounding in this whole situation is I don't believe the president has a plan. I think it's impulsive, it's day to day, it's how he feels, and he's not being given, I think, the support and the planning that is necessary to make judicious judgments. So this is like a minute to minute, whatever in president's head at the time, and that's not a pathway to success.
Dan, in all the US government retrospectives on the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, one of the things they will point to is there wasn't a coherent strategic goal, some endpoint that the US was trying to get to in those wars that was achievable. And so here, Senator Reid is saying President Trump doesn't have a real strategy and is just acting on whim. Do you think that's correct, or do you see Trump having an actual strategy here, some way he's using the military to achieve an actual goal that can be met?
No, that's a great question. And one thing that Senator Reid said that I think has to be corrected: President Trump had the advice of people that knew. Joe Kent in the room, the counterterrorism expert, the entire intelligence complex, all 18 intelligence agencies all said the same thing. This is not necessary. His own chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said this is probably not a good idea. It'll have massive casualties. So he had the intelligence, but his assessment that he probably doesn't have a plan, I think, is probably pretty accurate. I think his confidence over what happened in Venezuela and his ability to go in there in 37 seconds and overthrow a duly elected leader of another country kind of maybe gave him a little bit more confidence going into Iran than he really had justified. And the problem with all presidents is that it's easy for them to drag us into a war, and it's almost impossible for them to drag us out of one. And when we only have a few handful of people in Congress who are principled enough to say, wait a minute, we shouldn't be doing this without a proper authorization, Thomas Massey coming to mind being the primary, it's hard to point the finger at anybody else but the president. He gave his own deadline once upon a time. He said, I'm going to follow the War Powers Resolution, even though I think it's unconstitutional. I have 60 days to do whatever I want. Well, Mr. President, we've passed that 60 days. And that same unconstitutional War Powers Resolution that you cite as your authority, you've now exceeded even that authority. So what Congress should be doing right now, they should be taking a vote on a declaration of war. And when it doesn't pass, because it wouldn't pass, this is the most unpopular war in American history. then the president should be forced to withdraw our troops and accept the consequences as they are. That we just want to go back to what the world looked like before we invaded Iran. You know, an open strait, $2 gasoline, and the same family in charge of Iran that's in charge today.
Absolutely. Dan, I wanted to ask you about our Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. You are a, veteran. You have fought in these wars. And sometimes people will point to somebody like me who has never served and say, you don't understand what he's trying to achieve with this rhetoric, saying that, we're going to basically blow up what we want and do what we want in international law. Be damned, that's really not a concern of ours anymore. What do you think when you hear that rhetoric? Is this just meant to kind of pump the guys up and give them the courage that they need to do these admittedly very difficult, and if you're actually going to carry out the mission, you're not looking at the overall goal, very brave in what they're doing, courageous, is that or is that really going too far in some of his rhetoric?
So, I served under quite a few different secretaries of defense at the time, not now Secretary of War. Never once were they the cheerleaders of the men and women in uniform. And I really feel like Pete's doing what he thinks is his job as the Secretary of War, and that is to be the hype team for all the men and women in uniform. What he really should be is the voice of restraint and caution that says, hey, our military will execute any lawful order you give us, Mr. President, but our honest assessment is this. If we go into Iran, if we bomb and invade Karg Island, if we have an amphibious assault, it's going to cost X dollars and X lives. That's what the Secretary of War's job should be. That and procuring weapon systems and equipment into the future and setting a path. We had a brand new national security strategy that just came out a few months ago and said that this wouldn't happen. This invasion of Iran without a constitutional reason wasn't going to happen. And boy, we threw that right out the window as soon as the first opportunity arose. So Pete, it's disappointing because he endorsed our efforts to defend the Guard back when he was just a lowly news commentator on Fox News and just a National Guard officer with combat experience. But now that he's the Secretary of War, he's thrown all caution into the wind. And, we call him now the peptide frat boy is now the pump up factor for the United States military.
Yeah, and some of it has just, seemingly been so over the top and unnecessary. Even, there's probably ways to kind of rally the troops and say that they have the support of the American people, the American government, without going as far as he has. I actually have this clip of Pete Hegseth that I want to play for you.
We have established a powerful red, white, and blue dome over the Strait. American destroyers are on station, supported by hundreds of fighter jets, helicopters, drones, and surveillance aircraft, providing 24/7 overwatch for peaceful commercial vessels, except Iran's, of course, which is why our ironclad blockade remains in full effect as well. In fact, 6 ships tried to run the blockade out of Iranian ports as Project Freedom commenced, and they were all turned around. To what remains of Iran's forces, if you attack American troops or innocent commercial shipping, you will face overwhelming and devastating American firepower. The president has been very clear about this. We prefer this to be a peaceful operation, but are locked and loaded to defend our people, our ships, our aircraft, and this mission without hesitation.
So, Dan, we keep hearing from the administration that this war is going really well. We're able to control the Strait of Hormuz, yet that doesn't seem to be the case. So, what do you make? How do you think this war has gone for the United States so far?
I'm going to start by complimenting the men and women in uniform. What they're doing is a nearly impossible task, and they're executing as flawlessly as possible. The Operation Freedom, which is supposed to be United States military escorting commercial ships of non-Iranian origin through the Strait, it failed before Pete even gave that speech. And I think it was the Saudis that just kicked us off of the bases in their country, and we're no longer able to operate there. So the Iranians in their third world military have now chased 2 carrier groups out of the Gulf. They've shot down a stealth fighter, the most advanced military warfare in the entire world. We've had to go in with National Guard troops to rescue the pilot. There's questions about the validity of that. They've downed helicopters. They've downed C-130 aircrafts. They've taken down a refueler. And this third world ragtag military that we bombed back into the Stone Ages, according to the narrative, it effectively still has the Strait down on lockdown, but we're the ones claiming the victory. And President Trump's own red line now is that the Strait will be open and Iran will not be able to have a blockade, but we're the ones that are actually claiming the blockade as our own victory. The messaging is all over the place. And truthfully, what Americans want, and this is an overwhelmingly unpopular war, what Americans want is to know that our military is being used for the safety and security of the United States of America and not being deployed at the whim of another foreign entity, another nation, or anybody else's interest besides our own. And right now, our military, performing bravely and nobly, are doing it at the wishes and whims of another nation.
So for the past, I think, 4 weeks, we've been in a very kind of flexible ceasefire with Iran. I mean, we're not launching missiles at Iran anymore, yet we are firing on Iranian commercial ships. Iran is firing on commercial ships in the Gulf. Today, there was an attack on an Iranian port. Iran is pointing the finger at UAE for that. I'm sure that whatever the UAE is doing in this conflict, they are at least coordinating and getting approval from the Americans to do it. They're just not going out on their own and escalating. So, Dan, where do you see this going over the coming weeks as this ceasefire is looking more and more brittle by the day?
If I'm one of the Gulf nation states that America's guaranteed their security, and my hotels where my dignitaries and my international business interests were staying as guests, I'd be a little bit upset that this superpower of the United States couldn't provide the protection that they said they were going to provide. And so when the UAE and Saudi and other nations in the Gulf region start reacting and retaliating against Iran, it's to be expected. They were attacked by their neighbor and they were guaranteed defense and security by the United States. But we removed all of our security assets, all of our military personnel from the region and moved them into another country that also has a guarantee from us in the region. And we left everybody else exposed. So we not only did we stack the firewood and all the kindling, but we also dumped the gas and lit the match. And the response to that has been other countries with much smaller militaries, because we've guaranteed their safety for so long, are having to retaliate out of their own national sovereignty. So I don't know what the ultimate resolution is on this, but diplomacy is going to have to play a major role, and it's going to have to be done by adults in the room, people that can honestly report back to the President of the United States the true negotiating terms that have to be met. And I don't think that involves the team that went there the first time, because the team that went there the first time with Witkoff and Kushner are the ones that brought back the message that Iran was weeks away or days away or minutes or seconds, I'm not sure which one it was, of having 11 nuclear bombs. Did that mean that they had 10 at the moment? Or did they mean they have 11 half nukes? Or I don't know what the status was, but the fact that that narrative made it back into the American ecosystem because of it was told, frankly, by Netanyahu to Witkoff and from Witkoff to Trump, it tells you that we have a problem with our diplomacy that's over there right now. We need to send the adults in the room, some professional diplomats to help negotiate this peace. And I just don't think that the team that's there now is capable of it.
No, and they've obviously proven they were. In February, the Iranians presented a really good offer to the Americans. I think the Omanis, who are mediating the talks, believe there is no way the Americans would turn it down. And the Omani foreign minister was out there announcing the deal was all but done. And just a few days later, the U.S. attacked. And there's been reporting since that basically Kushner and Witkoff, Trump's son-in-law and real estate business buddy, were just unable to understand what Iran was offering because they didn't have the technical nuclear knowledge to do so.
Right.
And essentially snatch victory, defeat from the jaws of victory, right? They had it, it was there, and they absolutely blew it up. I have one more clip to play for you. This is President Donald Trump.
A big step further, but with that being said, they want to make a deal. We've had very good talks over the last 24 hours, and it's very possible that we'll make a deal. Yeah.
So Trump is saying the Iranians are just about to break. Do you see any indication that this war is about to be wrapped up? The Iranians are about to cede to the American demands?
No, not at all. Well, and I guess when we say is about to end, we have to look at that first graph that you put up there. I guess in the scale of 400 months of war compared to 2.5 months of war, we might be closer to the 2.5 months ending it than we are the 400 or whatever that is, the top 500 months. But here's the thing is President Trump's ceasefire deadline is scheduled to end, which he has now extended because he's going to be visiting with President Xi from China, and he doesn't want to disrupt those negotiations. I think ultimately what's going to happen when President Trump and Xi meet is that he's going to ask Xi for assistance to help end this conflict, because I don't think this is something that one world leader can end at this point. We've made a mess of it. We have attacked Iran twice in the middle of negotiations. Twice we've waged war on them while they are at the negotiating table with us, while a deal was within sight. Then we lied to the world that we destroyed every bit of nuclear capability that they have. We've destroyed their entire military, their Air Force, their Navy, their goat herds, their schools. We've destroyed it all. Yet Iran still stands proud in resisting the United States of America. So I think that this will end eventually, sure, but that's about an empty statement is what we hear from the White House. I don't think we see anything meaningful happen until President Trump comes back from his visit with President Xi.
Dan, I want to ask you about your organization, Bring Our Troops Home, and of course the main work that you do, which is trying to pass Defend the Guard. This is state level legislation where states would basically be reasserting their real authority, their constitutional authority over their National Guard units, saying that they could only be deployed to a foreign conflict if Congress were actually to declare a war. And some people might not think that that applies to what's happening in Iran, but I'm interested to know if we had this legislation in place, would there potentially be some National Guardsmen who are somewhere in the Middle East who would have to come back home to the US and couldn't be involved in these operations had this very important legislation actually been in place?
What a great question. And that there's a little bit of nuance to that. First, I was sitting down with Joe Kent. We talked about this at Ron Paul's spring conference just last week. There's 18 states, including his state of Washington and my state of Idaho, whose National Guard troops are currently deployed in the war in Iran and actively engaged in combat. In fact, my state, Idaho, we have A-10 pilots, and there is rumor, it hasn't been confirmed yet, that they were involved in the rescue of the downed F-35 weapons safety officer. So the National Guard is already there. 18 states are participating. The Defend the Guard legislation is very nuanced, and it's very clear that it is a break check. It is a moment in time, if it passes, where the governor and the legislature of the state that passes the bill can say, no, we're not going to release our troops into federal service onto Title 10 unless it's for a properly authorized purpose as found in the Constitution, which requires a declaration of war from Congress. But once the National Guard is activated, and the troops that are over there now are already activated under Title 10, they're essentially no longer National Guardsmen. The Air National Guard that's been activated, they are now United States Air Force. And the Army National Guard that's been activated, they are now United States Army. So once that point of debarkation is already passed, Defend the Guard wouldn't have helped them, but it would stop the next generation of National Guard soldiers from being deployed into a war that wasn't authorized by Congress. And the reason why this is so consequential is because about 50% of the total United States force structure is the reserve component in the National Guard. And we see that today of the troops that are deployed in Iran. Like I said, 18 states are now participating in that war. So if the military industrial complex, the people in the executive branch had to pause for just a second and start counting the assets and the human bodies that they had at their disposal without a declaration of war, they would stop these multi-front wars of choice because they wouldn't have the assets to deploy into it to win it successfully. That's one thing about American military strategy that I actually truly admire, is that we believe in winning with overwhelming force. And if we have a limited number of people that is actually cut in half, 50% of the available resources are withheld from being able to participate unless Congress does their job, I think it would cause a meaningful pause in the executive branch before they sprung headfirst into these wars of choice and these misadventures.
That is probably really important nuance, because I could imagine an argument against Defend the Guard would be, hey, if we have these troops deployed, these National Guardmen deployed to the Middle East, war starts off, but there's no declaration of war. We can't have these men who are a part of, a very complex warfighting system. You can't just remove one piece of it. You may leave other troops exposed or not be able to operate necessary offensive systems, something like that. And so it prevents that. But at the same time, if this war dreads on and more National Guardsmen would obviously need to be activated to fight in this conflict, then that's something that could happen. Now, I did want to ask you about one key component and something I keep hearing about from some of the more insane war hawks who, look, we should just dismiss and laugh at them like they're clowns, the Lindsey Grahams, the Mark Levins, Hugh Hewitt, others. But they are talking about a potential ground invasion of Iran, either limited just to Karg Island or some other disputed islands, or actually putting U.S. forces on the Iranian mainland proper. I mean, this seems to be absolutely insane. But if that were to happen, do you think the U.S. would need to call up the National Guard?
They would need to activate the National Guard and the inactive militia. I think that we don't have enough troops in our military force structure to be able to wage a ground war in Iran. It is geographically unfavorable. We don't have the points of entry and exit that we would need. Amphibious warfare in the region would be nebulous at best. Our United States Navy, the carrier groups, both of them had to be chased out of the Strait because the drone range now it defeats the effective range of our carrier groups. So we wouldn't have the air cover, we wouldn't have the air superiority, we wouldn't have the insertion capabilities, we wouldn't have the amphibious assault with the Marines. So what would we have? 82nd Airborne parachuting in? Well, I don't know if you've ever seen a parachute. It's very slow moving. It'll drop to the ground, and yeah, sure, shooting at somebody in a parachute violates international war, but in war, who's really checking the rules? It would be a bloodbath on all sides if a ground war in Iran were to break out, because I'll tell you what, we keep being promised that the Iranians will greet us as liberators. We've heard this fallacy before. There's not a massive groundswell of support for the United States of America, and especially our military right now in Iran, and here's why. We waged war unprovoked on their country, and we blew up a school full of children. We blew up bridges. We're blowing up infrastructure. We're blowing up power plants. We are attacking the civilian population. The groundswell of support that we're expecting that will greet us as liberators, it just isn't there. It wasn't there in Iraq either. It's a lie that we're told by the neocons to help put people to sleep at night that don't have to worry about it, that their sons, daughters, neighbors, nephews are going off to war in the Middle East. I don't think that a ground war in Iran could end in any possible way that any of us in America would support. There would be too much loss, too much expense, and too much human cost.
And I'm sure you would understand this better than almost any American, having been in Afghanistan. And I guess the Iranian mountains, maybe not as rugged, maybe not as high as the mountains of Afghanistan, but still, this is a country the four times the size of Iraq, with a massive mountain range running through it, including right outside of the capital city of Tehran. You know, when you look at the pictures of the city, there's a giant snow-capped mountain peak in the background. I mean, anything from your experience in Afghanistan suggests maybe the U.S. would have some way to pacify at least a portion of Iran with the ground force.
You know, one thing we did in Afghanistan when we got tired of being attacked with roadside bombs is we started paying the local warlords. So we had this thing called provincial reconstruction, where pallets of United States currency would be dropped off at these forward operating bases in the middle of the night out of a Chinook helicopter. The CIA and the other intelligence agencies would swoop in and pick up the cash. And then they would go out and bribe the warlords, who would then take the money that they were bribed with and buy weapons systems from the Taliban, exchanging cash for weapons and giving the Taliban more cash that they needed to buy additional weapons from Russia, Chechnya, and Eastern Europe. So our plan to appease the locals, it never turns out the way we want. The schools that we built in Afghanistan turned out to be Taliban command centers the day after we cut the ribbon on them. And so we don't understand enough about their culture, about the Middle East culture, about the Persian culture, about the Sunni or the Shia culture, to be able to influence it with just our dollars and our goodwill. You cannot expect a country to buy the democracy that we're giving them unless they truly want it. They're going to find their own form of self-governance, whether we like it or not. They're going to put their own leaders in power, whether we like it or not. And there's no amount of influence that the CIA or the United States State Department can push onto a country to make it seamless, flawless, and to represent what we would want in the Western world.
I think the war in Iran really, highlights how important defend the guard is. It is shown that our elected members of Congress are too cowardly to even vote for the war. Like, if you're willing to vote against the authorization for use of military force or the War Powers Resolution, then at least vote for a declaration of war to send our boys over there. That's never going to happen in Congress. And so this is at least one check that we would have on our country waging just endless wars anywhere we want in the globe if our states really would control the National Guard and implement your legislation. Are there any one or two states that you're looking at upcoming in 2026 that say, hey, this may be a real opportunity to pass this bill at least through one of their chambers of Congress or actually get it signed into law?
Yeah, there's multiple states, and the 2026 legislative session is over. Most states go from January to late March or early April, and it's an election year too, so they like to get out a little bit earlier so that their senators and legislators can get reelected. But this year, we were staged and ready to put the bill through two chambers in Arizona, through two chambers in Idaho, and on the governor's desk for signature or veto. We had the votes, it was lined up, it was ready to go, and then this ill-advised war of choice started. And American politicians believe in one thing, that when the troops are engaged in conflict, we get behind them unconditionally, no matter what. and the legislation was pulled in every state this year, and it all died on the vine. And the old adage that politics stops at the water's edge might be the biggest incorrect claim in American political history. We should be doing everything we can when our troops are engaged to ensure that we never use them unconstitutionally and put their lives at risk unnecessarily. And so we'll be back next year. We've still got the same whip count that we had right now. There will be an election between now and then where some of the bad guys that we face regularly will be defeated or they're being challenged. But we think we're coming back next year with 2 really good state efforts in Arizona and Idaho. We've got a good push in New Hampshire. We had a really unexpected push in Maryland that went really well this year, probably the best Defend the Guard hearing we've ever had. The Texas state GOP convention's coming up here in a couple months, and we are positioned in Texas. Chip Roy, who's about to become the Attorney General, fully endorses our bill and says he would defend it in front of the Supreme Court if needed. We have the momentum. The first chip will fall, the first domino, and whether it's Idaho or Arizona, we don't know yet. I want it to be my state, obviously. But once one falls, it'll be like the constitutional carry laws across the land, and it'll be state after state after state that will realize that it's okay to stand up against the federal government and exert our right as a sovereign state to say we're going to keep our militia at home and we're going to follow the Constitution. And if you want to take our boys and girls from Boise who are teachers and mechanics and tradesmen and business owners, if you want to take them to Iran, then Congress, you need to put your name on the line before they put their boots on the ground.
Yeah, I always have an eye on New Hampshire because I know that a lot of the free staters up there, the libertarians, really advocate for this legislation. And Maryland as well. My buddy Scott Spalding is a big advocate for this
Scott's one of the
legislation
best.
there.
Yep.
Yeah. Dan, before I let you go, I got to ask you, Tucker Carlson last week said this to John Kiriakou, and I thought was absolutely fascinating.
You want to hear an interesting coincidence? I'm sure it's just a coincidence, but on 9/11, on the actual day, September 11th, there were 4 planes. 2 hit the World Trade Centers, 1 hits the Pentagon. The 4th, which was late, Flight 93, wound up crashing in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. We know that the vice president gave an order to shoot that plane down because, understandably, by the way, believed it was headed into Washington, which I think it was.
Yes.
4 American fighter jets were scrambled from D.C., chased that plane, and the story was, their explanation was, we didn't get there in time, and the plane was brought down instead by Todd Beamer and the other passengers, famously. Of those 4 fighter jets, of the pilots of those 4 fighter jets, they were National Guard pilots, 2 became generals.
Wow.
And one of them is Dan Caine.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's not widely known, but it's a fact.
Wow.
What are the odds of that?
Not good.
So, Dan, I saw a lot of people picked up on this, and you had a really interesting take. I'm hoping you share it with my audience.
Sure, absolutely. That I was listening to that episode on my way home. This is no joke. It shook me to my core. I had to pull over and really think about what I'd heard because although I'm a little bit older now, I have a lot more gray hair and I'm not nearly as fit as I used to be. It gave me hope for a half a second. And let me explain why. Because when I started hearing about that, I remembered a story about the pilot that was the flight commander from the National Guard that was flying that day. And when the order came from Dick Cheney, the unilateral order from the Vice President of the United States to go ahead and shoot down a civilian aircraft, put a missile through the airplane, the pilot, the mission leader, told his wingman, I'll do the shooting. Don't shoot. This one's on me. Not because he wanted to shoot an American airline down, but because he didn't want his wingman to have to bear the weight of that decision of killing his own countrymen. And when I heard the story from Tucker, I connected that dot that, oh my gosh, that story from way back 25 years ago was Dan Caine. And I thought for a moment, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff might have an ounce of restraint in him that we would want as a leader of maybe a more restrained foreign policy. And so I really started doing some digging. Is Dan Caine truly that restraint in the White House? And if you remember the stories leading up to the Iran war, Axios broke a story that Dan Caine was the one that says, this is ill-advised, Mr. President, we shouldn't do this. President Trump came out later and said that's complete farce. Dan Caine believes in peace through strength and overwhelming power, yada, yada. And then I started really researching it and realized that Dan Caine may have been a restraint for a moment, about 3 weeks. He might have been the voice of restraint, but that Israel had sent the leader of Mossad, the leader of their intelligence agency, the leader of their military, and their prime minister to the United States to meet with President Trump. And 3 of the 4 people in that delegation had one person they wanted to meet with, Dan Caine. And after that meeting on the 23rd of February, Dan Caine came out as the #1 cheerleader of the war in Iran. He's converted. He's no longer that voice of restraint that I hoped for. And so, like I said, I was shook on that when I heard that he was that pilot, that maybe he's the voice of reason that we needed. Maybe he was a man in uniform with stars on his collar that was going to do the same thing that Joe Kent did and say, this is ill-advised. And then when I started piecing together the rest of the puzzle, I realized that he's just another captured man, just like every member of Congress that has their own APAC handler and every member of the executive branch who is bowing down to some invisible power that we don't recognize as our own. And my hope was dashed immediately. And so I returned from having hope in Washington, D.C. and placing my hope back where it belongs, in the states. And that's why we have fought for Defend the Guard in the states, and that's why we will always fight in the states. We'll never fight in the swamp because it's a fight that we can't win.
It is disappointing because I do remember there being some leads to the media in the run up to the war that sounded like they were coming from the top levels of the military, not necessarily the Pentagon and Pete Hegseth, but the actual military. And there is a real trend in the US where sometimes the actual generals and admirals and people like that in the military are the ones who understand that they will be sending the boys and girls to go over there to fight and die, to kill or be killed, and are maybe a little bit more restrained than politicians, particularly the likes of somebody like Lindsey Graham, who, just never actually thinks of human souls when he's talking about war. It's all about, games and dollars and the geopolitical chessboard and all that. And I had hoped that was the case, but it has become very clear as you assess that he is just another member of the war party at this point, is fully on board with this conflict.
Yeah, I think he has fully internalized this war as his own now. I think that he's really taken that position. And one comment about Lindsey Graham, the man who, for some reason, I still can't piece this together, the man who has a Bronze Star with Valor, Lindsey Graham, because he was a JAG officer, he got a Bronze Star with Valor, meaning he did something brave in combat, as the one who wants to send the American military to fight every war. And just a few weeks ago, he said this publicly. He said, if this goes bad, blame me. Well, Lindsey, we're blaming you. You and your magic wand from Disney World, we are blaming you.
Absolutely. Dan, thank you so much for your time on the show
Kyle.
today. Everybody, bringourtroopshome.us is the website. And then, of course, like and share this episode. Help us get out there to a few more people. If you have any comments or questions, ideas for future guests, drop those in the comment section. And then subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out. Thank you, everyone.